What's up, guys? I'm BTC. Overwatch has a brand new balance patch with a whole bunch of interesting changes for a variety of characters. They never had this patch on the PTR. They didn't have it in an experimental patch or anything. They just dropped all these changes onto the live version of the game, and some of them are pretty interesting. So let's go and check them out. The first one is going to be for Moira, and what they did was they buffed the Fade ability, so now you can jump much higher when you use the Fade ability. But what's even better about this is you can combine it with the normal Fade boost. So what you used to be able to do is you would fade into an object that was about knee-high, right? It was about, halfway up the character. And then if you jumped at the same time, it would launch you into the air. Now, because you have the extra height from this Fade boost, you can get even higher than you could before. And there's a lot of different places where this is possible, and you can do some pretty cool stuff here. So, I mean, you have a lot more mobility with Moira now than you ever did before. I don't know if they're actually going to end up keeping this, because I do have a feeling that a lot of people are going to complain about it. But this is an interesting change for Moira, and this kind of goes into one of the things I wanted to just mention overall about this patch, is it does seem like a bunch of these changes are kind of geared towards what we can expect for Overwatch 2. That seems to be even more the case with the next character, which is Reinhardt, who got a pretty substantial buff to his ultimate. So now, in addition to the stun and the knockdown that you normally have, it will also deal 200 damage. That is a massive, massive buff to this character. And again, for Overwatch 1, it seems like it's kind of a little too much, right? Like, it already has a huge amount of impact with just the knockdown and the stun aspect of it. But now you're also adding a pretty significant amount of damage as well. And what are we going to have with the tank characters in Overwatch 2? They're being turned more into basically fat DPS. They're going to be bruisers now instead of tanks. They're going to focus more on dealing damage than on protecting teammates. So this, again, seems to be in line with changes that they want to make for Overwatch 2. Next up is Hanzo, who's getting a pretty incredible buff. They're basically giving him a sort of version of the scatter arrow ability back, except it's going to be attached to the storm arrows. So what happens is now when you activate storm arrows, it will bounce off of a wall. Now, it should be noted that it will only bounce once, so it's not like the old scatter arrow where it will just keep bouncing around a bunch of times if it's in a small room. So this will only bounce once. However, that is pretty significant, because now, if you miss with your initial shot, you still have a decent chance of doing that damage or possibly hitting another target that you didn't actually intend to hit and still doing that damage. So that's a pretty big buff to Hanzo. Next up is McCree, who is once again getting the ability to use the roll while in the air. This is a pretty good functionality for the character. It allows you to take a bunch of shortcuts. I've made a couple of videos showing a bunch of those. So you can get to areas where you normally wouldn't be able to. But it also has a lot of use during the fight. If you get knocked into the air by a Doomfist or a Winston or a Hammond or something, and you're knocked into the air, you can then just roll out of the way, roll backwards, roll to the side. There's a lot of different uses for this other than just trying to, get some shortcuts on certain maps. And I did make a couple of videos showing off those shortcuts, so you can check those out if you want to learn more about those. But this is definitely a pretty strong buff for McCree that allows him to do a lot more stuff than he normally would be able to. Next up is Torbjorn, who's getting a simple yet pretty strong buff, and this is going to be for his alternate attack. It's now going to use 2 instead of 3, which means that you have more attacks when you're up close. It's going to make you a little more dangerous. And also, you can now more freely switch between your primary and your secondary and not really have to worry about it. Also, little extra tip that I want to throw out there for anybody that doesn't know. See how I only have 1 right now? I can still use my alternate attack as the full damage, even though I only had 1 left instead of 2. And this will work for any character that requires you to have a certain amount for your alternate attack. So even Widow, for example, if you don't have enough for what would normally be a full attack, you can still use it even if you don't have that full amount. So just a little extra tip to throw in there for you. Next up is Hammond, and this is the only character that got a nerf in this patch. And what they did was they made it so that you cannot have the grappling hook attached to a wall for longer than 6 seconds. After that, it will just break and puts the ability on cooldown. Now, this comes from almost being a good idea. The point of this was to prevent people from just stalling on a capture point where they would just attach it and swing around endlessly, whether it's on the capture point, the payload, or whatever. So Blizzard wanted to deal with that, and this is how they're going to stop that. But the problem is that there are a lot of other situations where you need to set up something, or where you are just, kind of using Hammond in other general use that isn't the, the annoying spin to win kind of stalling tactic, and you need to have it attached for more than 6 seconds. So while this does prevent the spin to win stall, it also damages Hammond's just normal gameplay. So this is a situation where Blizzard almost had a good idea, but they didn't test it enough, and it ended up breaking some things that shouldn't be broken. So I'm not exactly sure how they could fix this, but it does seem like just leaving it like this is probably not a good idea, because while it does fix the spin to win, it creates other issues. So that would need to be looked at. So those are all the changes. I think this is the first real balance patch we've had in 3 or 4 months. I know we had the experimental patch, but that thing was dumb and it was just a joke, so it doesn't count. But this is actual balance changes that seem to be improving the game, which is a nice change of pace, I guess. So there you go, guys. What do you think of these changes? Let me know down below. A big thanks to all the Paragons and other channel members for all your support. If you'd like to become one and grab some cool rewards, click the join button down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.